Thank you, Ryan. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to spend some time talking about how we find digital success in the automotive world. There's a lot going on right now, and before I talk about how we find success, I probably should talk about what's going on. We at TransUnion have access to lots of data and insights, and I thought I'd spend a few minutes giving you some context about the problems that we need to solve amidst the context of the world's challenges right now. So what's really going on? In 2022, the Collins Dictionary word of the year was permacrisis. This word describes a period of time after a catastrophic event when we have instability and insecurity. Some would argue that the permacrisis is actually ongoing, which is the very definition of the word. Some would argue that the pandemic is over and we should return to normality, but there is no return to normality. We find that just in South Africa, the economic growth forecasted for 2023 has been reduced to somewhere near 0.1%. We just heard recently that Eskom has forecasted stage 8 load shedding for the winter that lies ahead. These are many challenges, but they aren't just only in South Africa, it's around the world. We're talking about wars, Russia versus parts of the world, the Ukraine. We have challenges in the US with the debt ceiling. These are challenges that we all are facing in a post-pandemic world. But these are things that we need to figure out how we can get our heads around by embracing the data and the insights in the challenges. If I bring this back to our very industry, the automotive industry, we've just released our data around the vehicle sales over the last year. In our last VPI research report for Q1 2023, we actually found, when I compare back to the 2022 year, we found there was a massive drop in car sales, some 12.2%, considering both auto, new and used cars. If we look at the used car sector, the sales dropped some 17.7% for the used cars bought through finance. Generally, prices have gone up, and the auto sector has not actually been some industry that's been kept out of that. We saw that vehicle car prices, both in the new car sector and the used, went up. In the used car space, some 8.1% pricing increase when compared to Q1 last year. These are challenges that we have to deal with, and amidst all of that, the consumer is under duress. What we found in our latest Consumer Pulse survey, that some 40% of households are not able to make their bills in full every month. That tells you about the depression and the strain on our households. The biggest challenge for us in the automotive sector is some 2/3 of households have cut back on discretionary spending. They aren't able to fund insurance or things like mobile services or even the internet. Streaming services are all down. So the very money we would rely on to fund new purchases in response to our targeting actually is not available. So that pressure on the household has to change. But the consumer themselves has changed. Since the pandemic, how we approach our lives has changed fundamentally. And I'm not just talking about digital. Of course, in the pandemic, we stayed away from stores, from branches, from dealerships. We stayed away generally because we were locked into our households. But during that time, everything we thought was important to us changed fundamentally. If I was thinking about buying a new house or a new suit or a new car in a certain pattern, myself, I always buy a car every 3 years. At a certain kilometers when I feel that's the right time to buy a car. It could be my OCD wanting to buy a new car, feeling that something could go wrong, even though my car's under warranty. However, that changed fundamentally. In the midst of the pandemic, my focus and your focus was on my health, our wellness, how we could get food to our houses via delivery without contracting the COVID pandemic. How did we actually transport ideas to places? How do you transport goods to places? How did we work? Everything that we knew prior to the pandemic was fundamentally changed. The focus on the consumer was completely changing. One of our big things, both in the auto industry, the retail industry, or the banking industry, we believed our customers were loyal. We believed our customers would always come back post the pandemic, but things changed. As our customers thought about what is really important to them, there was some kind of cathartic reset of their priorities. They thought about what they should focus on in their lives going forward. They considered every choice they made prior to the pandemic, and those choices have lived on. Choices such as, when I buy the car, what groceries do I buy? Do I buy a certain brand of t-shirt, or will any t-shirt do? These are the choices they had, not just because of a rethink of their priorities, but on the pressure of their households, on budgets and where they spend their money. When you consider the current pressure of load shedding, of high interest rate increases, we've had interest rates go up as high as 11.25 on the prime lending rate. For the average consumer, they are now paying some 3,000 rands every month, more than they did a year ago on a typical R1,000,000 home loan and a 350,000 rand car. So customers have changed how they think, and we need to understand what has happened. They've made their choices to shop around, to rethink. They've decided to lease versus buy. They've started to think about green, the economy. They've started to think about, is there societal benefit to the choices they make? These are the choices that consumers are making. But the biggest thing that consumers made us realize that they won't go back to normality, that digital wasn't just a choice anymore. Digital was intrinsically part of how the world runs. The default state of the world was in fact now digital. We, as suppliers, as the industry, have to find a way to the consumer. We couldn't take for guaranteed that we own the consumer or that they would return. We had to find a way to pluck at their heartstrings, but first we had to understand what they really wanted. Our ability to understand the consumers would allow us to stay relevant in the mind of now a fickle consumer that's willing to change their mind because they couldn't afford to make their choices that they did historically. It was now about value and what was important to them. And our ability to understand what is important would change how we respond. So what does this all mean? So over the next few minutes, I want to talk about some examples outside of the auto industry, and then we'll bring it home in terms of what could happen going forward. Now, the one brand that you probably know, well, if you're a Gen Y or a Gen Z, you definitely know this next brand. But if you're older like I am, I've just discovered a brand called Shein. Now, what is Shein? It sounds like a really odd name. Well, Shein is a retailer, what we call a fast fashion retailer, that really only came into its own back in 2019. Shein is a company that was some $5 billion in 2019, rose quickly to $15 billion by 2021. And today, they're forecasted to be a $60 billion business by 2025. Who are their competitors, you ask? The likes of Zara, H&M, and even luxury brands like LVMH. This is a company that literally we didn't know of 3 years ago, but now is in the minds of every home. Your youngster probably knows about this. Just ask them. Shein's business model is a great example of a concept we call phygital, a concept where digital meets physical. And if you ask, what is this? Is this omni-channel? No, it's not. It's a lot more. This is when we think about the experiences we have, whether it's on social media, whether it's on your messaging application, the instant gratification you have, your ability to fine-tune your experiences online, whether it's to your bank or talking to your friends, or whether it's online services. We now expect these in the real world. Shein has just launched their first physical retail store. Having launched in 2005, almost all their sales are online. Here's an example of how compelling their business model is. In a typical retailer, they would probably do some maybe 50 to 300 products in any given year. Shein, in a typical year, has 1.5 million products on their website. How do they do it? Well, it's not just about digital meeting physical. It's physical meeting digital in a world that's now connected. Almost all of the influencers are smaller entities, smaller individuals that are experiencing their fashion firsthand. It isn't big celebrities. Yes, they may have a few, but almost all of the effort is in finding ways to connect to what people want. They don't look at the runways for fashion advice. They ask consumers, independent designers, tell us what you want. If they could test via their insights and analytics that it's working, they double down on this. They fine-tune not just the experience, fine-tune their product and they go to market to what customers want. Their new foray into physical stores is because they're starting to compete with the bigger giants. They'll always retain their online presence, but they're starting to say, well, now we can compete with bigger organizations. This business emerged only in the pandemic, Shein. Another example of phygital worth noting is something that Tesco did back in 2011. Here you see an individual scanning a screen. Looks like any aisle in any food store where you pick a juice or pick a cold drink or pick a Prime, right? That's the big thing right now. Here's a reality. This individual has a mobile phone up scanning a barcode or a QR code at a train platform in Seoul, South Korea. He's figuring out what he wants tonight at his home before he jumps on the train. And here's the thing. As he scans it onto an app and presses submit, by the time he gets home, the goods are there waiting. This isn't 2023. It wasn't in the midst of the pandemic. This was 2011. They found a way to take the instant gratification of doing things quickly online, realize the pressure that consumers faced, and they found a way to make it real. Find an experience where the consumer was immersed in a very quick way to do something and get the reward they needed. And guess what? This became a way of how the world works. Think about our virtual stores. Think about our online places that you go to buy goods, to buy food. How many of you go into physical stores, or how many of you go onto your app and have the food, have the supplies come to you? This is now the reality. This example is from back in 2012. But Tesco didn't stop there. Today, right now, Tesco has just launched a concept called a Get Go store, powered by technology called Trigo software. When you walk into one of their stores, you walk in with a phone in your pocket that has a unique identifier, and you've signed up to participate in a Get Go store. This store has no prices on the goods. This store has no queues, and there's definitely no people waiting to cash you out. What Get Go does have is the ability for you to pick up food, put it into your basket, and walk out the store with it. The technology is able to detect every unique piece of food in the store and price it on the fly. As you exit, your phone passes a scanner and it charges it to your account. Once again, the instant gratification, the experiences we enjoy in the online world has been thrust into the world of physical and challenges the very notion of how shopping is being done. This is an example of what we can expect to see more and more as the consumers force us as large organizations to adjust how we go to market. The customer, once again, is in charge. They're the bosses, and we've got to be listening to what they want so we can change our go-to-market and our approach. The final example outside of the auto industry is something that Disney did back in 2013. Disney, like a big theme park, like you have Six Flags or even Gold Reef City in South Africa, one of the biggest challenges we have is standing in lines, paying for things, whether it's for popcorn or a cold drink, or whether it's to get into a queue to repeat a ride. These were all frictions points within the actual experience that a consumer had coming to their theme parks. Back in 2013, they launched what we call a magic band that you could use on your wrist, aligned to your favorite cartoon character. You could preload as a parent at your home, before you even left your home, all the rides your kid was allowed to go on. You could pre-allocate spending money and even set it up so they couldn't buy alcohol or couldn't buy a certain product while they're in the theme park. And through this all, the kid could be tracked anywhere in the theme park. So here, Disney spent a lot of money to remove friction in the experience and maximize that the magic that they wanted to create will in fact be felt by the consumer. It wasn't a start-stop, it was just have fun continuously, and all the logistics and all the admin was taken away. Many of these examples started before the pandemic. It accelerated throughout the pandemic. And now as the world is digital by default, it begs the question, how do we start to think about our jobs, what we do? How do we approach the consumers that walk into dealerships, that walk in and ask us about the car? How do we explain to them what is important in their context, in their language? Youngsters, the Gen Z specifically, care less about the car itself, but what it does for the environment. They care about your organization, what your principles and values are, and what you stand for in the society. Whatever you do, it has greater good. In fact, most Gen Zs that we study focus on the greater good and less about materialistic possessions. They focus even less on having things that, like cars. Why should they buy a car when they can participate in something we call the sharing economy? These are the challenges that were thrust upon us post-pandemic in a world that's now digital by default. So here's the question for us. What's ahead for us in the auto industry? The answers aren't clear because there's more questions than answers for each one of you listening to this webinar today. As we consider the auto industry, we have a few things we should get our heads around. And at the very minimum, I'm hoping to tell you what's out there for you to double down, pay attention in the rest of the seminar as we consider some of these thoughts, ideas, and trends for you to take away and say, what do I have to do to stay relevant as an individual, as a professional within the industry? Staying relevant is a choice for me and for you. We have to learn a new language, a new way of approaching our business, a new way of approaching our colleagues, our consumers that we've never done before. We're now going to be challenged to work in a new way. So the first thing to mention is that myself, I actually bought a car over WhatsApp. That sounds crazy. In the midst of the pandemic, I actually bypassed my typical 3-year cycle, let the car go past 80,000 kilometers, but I really wanted a car, and I've been brand loyal to a car since my very first car. What I found was the car I wanted at a dealership on an online platform, but I couldn't physically get there. It was another province completely. I found the phone number of the salesperson, sent a WhatsApp saying, is the car still available? Is this the best price I can get? Is the car under warranty? And can you confirm on email that it has had no accidents? Having passed what I thought was my preliminary checks, I asked this individual for close-up videos of key areas of the car, knowing this brand specifically well and where my concerns would lie. Having seen high-definition video of these areas, I concluded the OTP, did the finance online via an e-contract without signing any physical documents, and 4 days later, I had the car in my driveway. Many of the things I spoke about earlier in the examples of how people went to Disney or bought things at a store, I had manipulated technologies that are available today, be it WhatsApp or an email or an online contract, to do something that you would typically see me doing in a physical store or a physical dealership. These are examples of how it's very possible to construct new experiences in real time. Myself, maybe I'm a more sophisticated buyer. Maybe I trust more. But these are things that are being done more and more. It's what I as a consumer, you as a consumer, want to happen. Therefore, we as an industry need to evolve to be relevant. So what are the 3 things I'm going to leave you with today as I wrap up and tell you about the trends coming ahead? The first thing is, we've all been asking, is this the end of ICE? And not ICE in the physical, cold sense. No, it's the opposite right now. This is our internal combustion engine cars. If you don't know this, last year there were 520 battery electric vehicles sold in South Africa. This year, we expect to sell as an industry some 1,000 BEVs. The biggest thing last year, if you don't know, was plugless hybrids, and some 4,000 were sold. So there's some movement towards capturing this new segment of vehicles entering the market. But how do we fare when compared to global manufacturers? Last year, 10.5 million battery electric vehicles were sold globally. Why is that happening, and why are we so much smaller than the global numbers I'm talking about? Well, in the EU, every country within the EU, some 27 countries, have signed up to stop manufacturing and selling new cars that have ICE engines between 2030 and 2035. And that's the reality of the market they're having. A lot of these cars, a lot of innovation, new models, new makes, from sedans to mid-sized vehicles to trucks, are now moving into plug-in, plugless, or into BEVs. That's reality. But what are we expecting for us? And are we anywhere close to that reality, given our own challenges at a policy level, at an infrastructure level, talking about roads, talking about electricity? These are the challenges we need to overcome first before we see an acceleration. But there's a lot more going on. We're a supplier of vehicles throughout the world. We need to find a way for government to support the acceleration of production for this to happen. But in the meantime, we need to keep selling to move the industry forward so we can keep growing. We're going to see an evolution of how we sell, a consumer being a lot more mindful of the environment, of climate change, and of fossil fuel. These things aren't necessarily inferred by the consumer. They're inferred by their children and the Gen Zs that typically reside in the house. They want their parents to do more and to be more. So a key thing about ICE is to educate yourself around what's happening, be it hydrogen fuel cells or plugless hybrids, or have a point of view on what's happening in the bigger landscape. We probably won't meet the deadlines at a global level. We need to push and accelerate as an industry, working together to get government and private sector to come together to make us move to a greener, more sustainable future. That's what we all need to do to sustain the lives of our kids and of our own futures. In the meantime, we need to educate ourselves because the end of ICE isn't as close as we think. We will start to see an advent, an acceleration of battery electric vehicles and maybe new technologies like hydrogen. These are things that are coming our way. So what's the second thing? The second thing is a concept called the rise of the connected vehicle. And this isn't necessarily something that you haven't heard about. The visual up on the screen is something you're all familiar with, be it Android or whether it's Apple. These are the reality of what we see every day. And given the amount of time we spend in cars, some of us spending up to 2 hours a day in one direction, getting to work amidst all of the load shedding currently. This little space, this 12-inch screen, the 7-inch screen is becoming the real estate that will be key to the decisions that buyers make. It's not about the music or not about the maps. I expect to know where I'm going with all the advances in GPS and 5G technology. A really cool example that I always talk about is an example where in future you could drive past a retailer, a pizza place, a fast food outlet that starts to recognize that you need food and you always follow a certain pattern, and they could allow you to pre-order something before you get home. You're going to find that in this world of phygital, your car will need to know who you are. It starts with advances in infrastructure. Many OEMs have started to look at how they get base infrastructure, 5G connectivity into the car. Then enable things like marketplaces, whether it's a proprietary OEM marketplace or whether it's one of the car technologies from mobile phones that are making its way into its car. This is what's happening. We're going to have to think of new ways to create experiences for customers. It could be, for example, how insurers call us when you drive too fast over a speed bump to check that we're okay. I feel safer knowing that someone is watching and mindful of a trigger that says Lee's car was impacted in a high G-force incident. This is an example of the real estate that people are going to ask you more about. It's the value that customers perceive from your product more than anything else. The final example I'm going to leave you with today is a concept of buy versus lease. We've always been talking as automotive people, whether we're selling or manufacturing, what is the preference of our customers? The newest preference is something called the sharing economy. Back in 2012, we called this the we economy, where we all share in purchasing an asset or accessing an asset. It feels like a new form of timeshare, but the sharing economy is here to stay. The Gen Z specifically, as they come into adulthood, are the ones that need to be convinced that participating in the automotive industry makes sense. It's going to force us to rethink how we approach the concerns that the younger populations have. Remember that almost 50% of the cars that are sold today are in that Gen X and Gen Y space. The Gen Zs, the younger folk under the age of 26, are the ones that have different perspectives on what's important to them. We're going to have to think differently on what customers want and how we have to fine-tune our thinking and our responses. We're starting to see, for example, mobility as a service. There's at least 5 players in South Africa right now entering the market offering options where if a customer can't get traditional access to finance, they offer a subscription service where after a certain number of months, if you can't afford the car anymore, you can give it back. It may provoke us as dealerships, as finance houses, to think differently. What we do know is that there's long-held trust in the way the system works as an automotive industry. We have the ability for such an industry that's been embedded into the economy, it's key to the economy, for us to innovate, for us to evolve, and for us to fine-tune every choice we make based not just on global trends or local trends, but putting the customer in the center of every choice that we make. As we leave today's presentation, I hope to have triggered a few thoughts about what success could look like in the future, not just for you as an F&I professional or as an OEM leader or as a business. The reality, though, is that the world has changed. We're now intrinsically digital. We're in a world of ongoing crisis. We need to pay attention, fine-tune our approaches in how we talk, how we engage, how we sell, how we evolve our product, how we evolve our finances. The challenge is on us to drive our relevance. I wish you all a wonderful conference, and thank you for the opportunity once again.